promise to be true and help me understand.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Beatles on Uke with me, Matt Stead. In today's lesson we're going to learn a really nice chord melody arrangement of one of my favourite Beatles songs of all time, the beautiful If I Fell.
If I gave my heart to you, I must be sure from the very start that you would love me more than her.
The song was written and recorded in 1964 for the film A Hard Day's Night and its associated LP. This was an interesting songwriting period for the Beatles because most of the songs at this point were coming from John Lennon. In fact, most of A Hard Day's Night was written by John Lennon. And it's really interesting that we have this beautiful melody spanning almost an octave over the course of the song. We tend to associate the more melodic lines with Paul McCartney, but here we have John Lennon writing his first ballad with a really beautiful melody. It's interesting in that Paul used to write generally by coming up with a melody first and then fitting the chords around that, whereas John would come up with a chord progression first and then start to weave the melody around the chords. And we have a really good example of that here with the chords and melody being intertwined. In fact, if you take a quick glance at the score, you'll notice that the chords are almost changing with every single melody note. So let's have a listen to my chord melody arrangement of If I Fell first, and then we'll crack on with the full tutorial where I'll explain everything in a lot of detail. One of the things that you'll notice from the off is that this is actually quite a long arrangement, and there's lots of repetition and jumping about with the piece. But actually that can be a real positive thing, because you'll realise that there's also a lot of repetition. So once you've got a section down once, it's just a matter of repeating it when we come back to it later on. So what I'd like to do first is break this down into individual sections, and we're going to look at them one step at a time. So we're going to start by taking a look at the intro, we'll look at the chords and then the melody, and then we'll put the two together to create the chord melody arrangement. I really love the chords in this intro. They sound kind of exotic because rather than staying within the key, we have these chromatic chords descending downwards. So E flat to D to D flat. The song is in the key of D major, so that E flat minor chord at the start is acting as what we often call a backdoor chord. That's just a chord that's half a step away from the target chord. So don't worry too much about how to physically hold down these chords at the moment. I've provided diagrams to help you with your finger placement, but just know that when we introduce the melody, a lot of these chords are only going to be 2 or 3 finger partial chords. So don't sweat this first bit too much, but let's just have an attempt at these chords. First of all, we have this lovely E flat minor 7. That's just like a D minor 7 that's been taken up one position, like so. Then we have a D chord. We're going to play it with a bar and our little finger on the 5th fret of the A string. The reason being that when we go to the D flat next, we can just move that back. We keep barring the 1st fret and put our 3rd finger up here for a B flat minor. So that's that lovely descending chromatic section. Then we have a similar thing again. We've got an E flat minor. This time, because it's a minor and not minor 7, instead of having 3 fingers here and a little finger here, this finger has jumped to the B flat note here. So we have to kind of redo this chord shape like so. Then we have a bog standard D chord. And then we have some really beautiful chords, an E minor 7 followed by an A7. That chord progression at the end, E minor 7, A7, that's a 2-5 leading into the 1 at the start of the next section. So a 2-5-1, a really popular jazz progression. And it really just eases the mood and segues us nicely into the verse. So we have those kind of chromatic descending chords, creating tension and a bit of moodiness. And then as soon as we hit that 2-5-1, just coming up here, notice the mood lifts. And then we're into the verse. With the lyrics, that will sound something like this. Just notice that we come in on the 3rd word. If I fell in love with you, would you promise to be true and help me understand? 'Cause I've been in love before and I learned that love was more than just holding hands. And then we're into the verse. If I give my heart. What I like to do next when I'm working out a chord melody arrangement, even if it's already arranged for me, I like to see if I can play just the melody in isolation, because it gives you the kind of rhythm of that melody and it helps to give you the backbone of the song before we turn it into a full chord melody. If you take a look at the notation, you'll notice lots of sharps and flats, and that just goes to show that the melody is outside of the normal key. That's why it sounds so exotic at this moment. So you can use the tablature to help you, and all I want you to do is very slowly just play through the melody from the opening section, the introduction. It will sound a little something like this when you've got it ready. 1, 2, 3. And that was just an illustration, so don't worry at all if you're not able to play it yet or at that tempo. That's absolutely fine. You can pause the video and practice it on your own. But just a few pointers. Notice that I'm using multiple fingers. This melody weaves all over the place because of those chromatic notes, so it really helps to use as many fingers as possible as you work through the melody. Notice, for instance, that after the second note, I'm moving that index finger up because it allows an easier stretch up to the 4th fret here. And then I go back to these 2 fingers to complete that phrase. So really think about which fingers you're using as you work through that melody. And remember, if you can't read sheet music or if you're really struggling to think about the timing of the song, sing along in your head with the lyrics or hum along as you go. So for instance, if I was to take it slowly, I might sing like this. If I fell in love with you, would you promise to be true and help me understand, 'cause I've been in love before and I found that love was more than just holding hands. So you see there, I don't really have to think about the timings in terms of counting dotted notes and things like that. I naturally pause on notes where the lyrics pause because the original songwriter, in this case John Lennon, or Paul McCartney, who's singing the harmony, would be taking a break to breathe. I find sometimes if I get distracted or I can't remember the lyrics, sometimes I'll just hum the melody and that works as well. That will just help you with your note placement. So let's do the exciting bit now and put the chords and melody together. Notice that I've chosen to put chords on beats 1 and 3 here. It just works with the flow of music. And notice that we're doing partial chords. So that first E flat minor, rather than being an E flat minor 7 with our little finger here like it was when we did the version with lyrics, if I fell in love with you. The reason that we're only doing 3 notes in that chord, the top 3 strings, is the melody note is this note, this G flat. That note there. If I fell. And if I was to do a full E flat minor 7th chord, if I fell, we're hearing this note, the note on the A string, because it's the last thing Ari is here. But notice if I just play the top 3 strings and rest my thumb there on the A string to stop myself playing it, I'll get that G flat note coming out. You can really clearly hear the melody, right? If I fell. And that's the way this chord melody works. We basically strum a chord and we stop strumming after we've hit the melody note. And just really dig in. So you strum down with that thumb, just bringing it across the top 3 strings and down. And then really rest it on that A string. Don't take your finger away because you'll lose the lovely G flat note. Just drag it down and rest it on that A string. Now with a clever bit of finger placement here, we can make this, with a clever bit of finger placement, we can make playing these chords easier as well. So what I do is I get these 3 fingers in the E flat minor shape, but I move this first finger back to the 1st fret. So when I play the 2nd note, my finger is in the right place for this F note here, 1st fret of the E string. Then I push it forward and strum the chord. Remember resting on that A string. The next note, this A flat 4th fret of the E string, I can just put my little finger down and then I can do the same thing again. Same again, going into the next section. So notice the whole of this first measure, I barely have to move this shape. And that's nice because it keeps things smooth and it sounds really clear as well. The next measure is based on a D chord. Again, the melody note is within the chord. It's this G flat again, but this time over a D chord. So again, we only want to strum down with our thumb on the top 3 strings. Sometimes I'll do that as a bar. It works both ways. Okay, whichever you feel most comfortable. Reach up again to this 4th fret, off for the E note and back down. So here we have, again, really staying in the shape. Similar thing here. Now this next one, the D flat, is interesting because we have this D flat chord shape like this, but the melody note at the start of the next measure is this D flat note here, just the 1st fret of the C string. So even though the chord looks like this, we're only going to strum the top 2 strings, like so. But as a general rule, I try and keep my finger in the chord shape because quite often the next chord or note is within that shape, and it is the next one. We're going to strum all the way down. So for that measure, okay. If I put that together really slowly from the start, that will look like this. 2, 3. Isn't that lovely? So you can hear the melody coming through really clearly along with the chords, which is really beautiful. Just a little bit on technique here. Notice that I'm using my thumb for pretty much everything today. And when I'm picking individual notes, the movement is coming from the knuckle, just little movements down like this. So you notice the movements coming from the knuckle, and it allows me to pick the notes relatively quickly. Now when I put a chord in, notice that when I come down on the chord, I drag down and the movement is more coming from my elbow and the arm, like so. Here. Here. Sometimes I'll rest my hand here, but notice the whole arm is moving down. And what that does is it keeps things really sweet and mellow. If I just use my knuckle to strum that chord, quite often I get a harsher sound. It's just kind of a little bit more tense. Whereas if I just drag, it's a really natural sounding chord. So have a little bit of an experiment with that as you're putting these chords in. On the next chord, which was a B flat minor, which looks like this, we've got a melody note that's been added to the chord. That's because the melody note is this high C note. Understand, that one there. So we actually need to add that note into the chord. So we take a B minor chord, looks like this, and we add our 3rd finger. So we actually need to add that C note into the B minor chord. So we hold down a B minor chord and we place our little finger down here on the 3rd fret of the A string. Now remember, as you do this, this finger here only needs to put pressure on these middle 2 strings. You could almost do it like so, but I like to keep a whole bar down, but just I don't have to push really tight up here on the G or the A string, just concentrate the pressure on the middle 2 strings. We remove our little finger for the next note, and then partial chord, just top 3 strings. So we get this, like so. If you really struggle with that bar chord, you could get away with just barring the bottom 3 strings and just strumming the bottom 3 strings as you hit the B flat minor, like so. And then you would then need to just move up. So that might look like this. But see if you can experiment and see what feels most comfortable for you. I prefer just to do the full bar, like so. Then if we carry on, the next section, starting with the last 2 notes of that line, is the same as the start again. So I like to put this shape down in advance. Same as before, I keep this shape down until the next measure with the D. And then the next measure is really sweet. We've got this E minor 7 chord, but because the melody note is this E, just holding hands, we're only going to strum the top 3 strings. You can hold down the full E minor 7 chord, or as long as you're confident enough not to accidentally touch that A string, you can just do the one finger like so. Then we add this G flat note here because that's a melody, and the G note that follows, and we finish on this lovely A7. And that A7 chord is 5 above a D, so it creates a lovely little segue, some tension, before we go to the next section. So what I'll do is I'll play through the whole introduction chord melody style on close cam. Again, this is quite difficult, so this will take a lot of practice, so don't worry if you can't play along yet. Take your time, slow down the tempo and practice hard, and then when you're ready you'll be able to have it sounding something like this. Get this shape ready and come in after 2, 3. 2, 3. And at tempo, just an example, 2, 3. Isn't that a gorgeous introduction to a song? Beautiful chords, beautiful melody. Now let's take a look at the verses. Now the nice thing is we have a lot of repetition of these verses, so once you've got one, you've got a big chunk of the song. Notice here that the melody starts to rise in pitch, right up to this high E note. Later on it will go even higher. The great thing for us as ukulele players is that puts the melody on the A string. So when we play through the chords, you can strum all the way and you still hear the melody coming through with the chords. We don't have to do any partial rolls, stopping after a certain amount of strings, and that makes it really easy in one way. It makes it slightly tougher in another way because some of the chords are a little bit tricky, but I'll help you with them as we go. So we have this 2 and 4, that's a B note followed by a D flat note. I like to use my 1st and 4th fingers, even though the 3rd feels more natural here. The reason being is after I hit this 4th fret, I can move it up really comfortably into the 5th fret and bar the whole of the 2nd fret into this D chord, and it just smooths everything out. Keeps it nice and simple. Then we go up to an E minor chord up here. This is based on this shape, E minor, like we've taken an A minor shape and moved it all the way up here. Now to make things simpler, and because the melody note is on this A string, we're just going to strum down the bottom 3 strings, so not the G string, all the others, at the 7th fret. Now some people might like to use, say, their 3rd finger, because from that D, it's less of a reach. But because my finger's already on a bar here for the D, I actually prefer to move that right up. Sometimes I'll even keep the chord noise, I'll purposefully press as I move up. It's quite subtle, but you hear that really nice kind of legato smoothness. Now don't sweat that too much, but it's just something you can experiment with. So we have that 2-4 little finger, D chord, up to 7. Then we've got an F sharp minor. This is one of those chords that people really struggle with because it's 4 fingers with a stretch, but it's not so bad. Just think of it as like a G7 shape that's been moved up to the top 3 strings, like so. And then just reach that little finger out for the nice D flat note, this 4th fret here. So don't feel you've got to, you know, bam, get all of those fingers down at the same time. You'll see there I struggled. They didn't all land in place. But if you get that shape down first, you can then just put your little finger out and you'll be used to producing this shape because you'll have played a G7 tons of times. Notice that those 2 notes, the 2 and the 4, the B and the D flat, they belong to this phrase. If I fall in love. And that's the way to practice them. Don't play them as part of the introduction. Think of them as part of this phrase. We often call them pick-up notes. So if I put those together, I have. Then we have this brief chord. It's on beat 4, so right at the end of the measure. It's an F diminished 7th shape. This 1 2 1 2. Again, you can kind of think about it as a shape. You know how we played a G7 shape and then added this finger for the last chord? Well, this one you can think of it as a G major shape, just like a normal G moved up and over, and then little finger on the 2nd fret like so. Okay, so that will give me. All right, just at the end there on beat 4. Okay. Then we go to an E minor 7 up the fretboard up here. Now, what I tend to do is try and keep at least 1 finger on the strings as I change chords up the fretboard. It allows me to navigate up there. So after you've done that F diminished 7, rather than taking everything off and having to start again, keep that little finger down, move it up to the 5th fret, and then just think about forming a D minor shape behind it. So you can practice that round and round a few times. Get really comfortable with the change. That's one of the hardest changes in the song. Okay, really sweet. And notice that that F sharp diminished, as I say, is on beat 4. So 1 2 3 4. 1 2 3 4 1. So it's on that last beat before we go to the E minor 7. Notice here we've got 2 different E minor 7s. We've got one up here and we've got one down here. And remember, you can do that with any chord. An A7 can be played here, can be played here, can be played here. As long as you've got the same collection of notes, you can put them in different orders to get different shapes all over the fretboard. And the reason this is brilliant is that this E minor 7 has the D melody note, which we need, and this one has the B melody note, which we need. So it's a really clever way of playing 2 chords, which are technically the same chord in different places, but our ears hear that melody there, a D to a B. So right at the end of measure 12 on the offbeat before measure 13, we have this really quick E minor 7. And then almost immediately what you want to do is go to an A7 chord, but put your little finger up here on the 5th fret. It's a bit of a stretch, but I really like the wide voicing in this chord. Okay, so that will sound something like this from the start of measure 12. It's almost like a breath, isn't it, that second E minor 7. 1 2 3 4, and then straight into that A7. Now from that A7, we can just take our little finger back for the 4, the D flat, take it back to the 2nd fret, or you can use your 3rd finger and we strum. And then the next part, 2 4, it starts the first phrase again, so we have some repetition. So from measure 12, that will sound like this. And then the next part is exactly the same as what we did earlier. So we have 2, 4, D chord, up to 7, F sharp minor, that quick diminished chord, E minor 7 up here. And then again, we're repeating literally what we just did. Only this time we go to measure 18 and we rest on a D chord. Okay, so it's like we have that lovely resolution here. The song feels rested at this point, so we need a couple of chords to take us back to the start. And we've got a G minor 7 and A7, creating a mini 2-5-1 in D. These two chords, G minor 7 and A7, are the first two chords in the whole piece that don't have a melody note. They're just filling in a gap. Would love me more than her if I found... So you see, they're just filling in that gap. And it's really important to put them in there because they're in the original song. And it creates this nice 2, 5, 1 going back to the D chord in the next section. But what I do to differentiate them from the rest of the other chords is I just do a very light strum down with the pad of my thumb. So rather than use my nails, just the pad. Now if you don't have a nail on your thumb and you've been using the pad the whole time, you can still differentiate it either by coming down with the nails of this hand really light like so, or just keep using your pad, but keep it really light, like so. So you notice if I put that together with the section before, that it keeps things light and it almost creates like a 3D effect where it sounds like we've got another instrument coming in. Here on measures 18 and 19, you'll see we've got that 1 and the bracket on top. That just means the first repeat. So here we play all of the chords and notes in measures 18 and 19, and then we jump back to measure 11 where there's a repeat marker in the opposite direction. So you'll hit the 2 and 4 at the end of measure 19. That's a B and a D flat. And then you're just going to do another verse all over again, playing through the chords just as you've just done them. Nothing new here. And in fact, this comes in later on as well, so you've actually completed a fair amount of the song already. Now when we get to the end of measure 17 the second time, we jump to measure 20, this D9 chord up here. A lovely, lovely sounding chord. So that's really important to note, that where we have a first repeat with the number 1, we only play those measures the first time through. The second time we jump to the second repeat. We don't play measures 18 and 19 again. And amazingly, because there's so much repetition, you've done the vast majority of the song. But let's look at the bridge next, which is another new section. Rather than jumping straight to it, let's go from measure 17. So we're going to move from measure 17 straight through to measure 20. And again, same principle as before. Think about moving your little finger up as a guide as we go up the fretboard. So measure 17, I'll slow it down, it'll sound like this. Then we have this lovely D9 chord at the start of the next section. That creates a really beautiful tension. So notice that my little finger led the way up. I put it down here. I move it up to 7 and then I just form this G shape behind it. Again, thinking about shapes to complete the chord makes it a lot easier. So let's practice that transition really slowly from the A7. 3, 4. Lovely. Now you could use different fingers here to climb up from 9 to 10 and 12. But because I've already done so much work with this little finger, I like to just keep going with it. So after I hit the D9, I just like to move it up to 9, 10, 12, and then I drag back to the 10th fret, and we do this unusual G chord here at 7 and 10, a really beautiful chord. Another advantage of taking your little finger up is that the frets get really small up here, and I find my little finger, my pinky, will fit in the fret a lot easier than my first finger and get a nice clean note. So then I bring it back to 10. I do this mini bar, so I'm just barring the bottom 3 strings of 7 and strum all the way. And believe it or not, that's just a normal G chord. We've taken a C chord and we've taken it up to C sharp, D, D sharp, E, F, F sharp, G. The reason we can do this nice semi-bar version is that a G chord has a G in it. What's this string here? It's our open G. So that works just as well. You could play it like so, but I like the sound of that open G, particularly on a high G. Then I lead back with my index finger to this 5th fret here, and that buys me a little bit of time to get these 2 fingers down for this G minor chord up the fretboard. And you can really see that's just E minor, F, F sharp, G minor. It's an E minor shape moved up, okay? So we've gone from here, lead with the index, and then we do a similar thing. I take my index back here, and you could use your first or your third finger for the C note, but then lead with your index finger back up for another G minor chord exactly the same. Okay, so from that high G, I put my little finger down here for this high E note. I take it up a fret and strum, and then I like to take it right up to the 10th fret. So again, my little finger's doing all the work here. And then from there, this D chord is a G shape at frets 9 and 10. Really lovely. If you give that a little wiggle, if you take your thumb off the back of the uke and just give your hands a little wiggle, you'll get a vibrato chord, which is really sweet. Notice the movement's coming right from the elbow. My whole arm is moving. I'm not moving my fingers backwards and forwards like this. I'm just wobbling them. And that just teases out the chord. It gives it a nice feel and it makes it last a little bit longer. Again, that's optional. You don't have to do that. Then we just have the 7th and 9th frets for an E and a G flat note. And then this time we've got a different shape. It looks a little bit like a D7 shape that's been moved up. And we're just going to play the bottom 3 strings at 9 and 10. Again, you could give that a little wobble if you want. I don't go too crazy on that one because I need to use my thumb to push the bar down. So let's play the whole of the bridge, but we'll go from measure 17 so we can do that segue into it. So we're going to go from measure 17, we're going to jump over 18 and 19 to measure 20. So measure 17 to measure 20 and then just carry through to the end of the bridge. What I'll do is I'll come in on close cam and I'll take it super slow and I'll talk you through what I'm doing. So get your stretchy A7 ready like so. And what we're going to do is we're going to strum it all the way back to 4 and to 2 and strum back to 4. Now then we're going to go right up to this D9 shape. Carry on with your little finger up to 9, 10, 12. Then this high G shape like so. Reach back with your index finger, G minor chord. Back to 1 and 3. Lead with your index finger up. 7, add 8 and strum up to 10. And then G shape. 7 and 9, D7 shape. I'll put that all together. Come in on measure 17 after 3, 4 with me. 3, 4. So now, apart from a couple of measures on the outro, you have everything you need to play through this entire piece because there's repetition. All we need to do now is pay really close attention to the repeat markers and really concentrate on where we're going. The reason I had to put lots of repeat markers in is otherwise this song would have gone to 3 or 4 pages, which is really awkward for music stands and displays on iPads. So that's the reason we jump about a lot. So I'll talk you through what happens next, and you can just write down these notes as a guide or just follow it through with me now and you'll be fine. So we got as far as this A7 shape at the end of measure 26, all right? That's the first line of the second page, just a few measures along, measure 26, this 9, 9, 10. Then notice we have a 2-4, that's B, D flat. And we go to yet another verse. You know how to do this? Because you've already done it. Let's just play through it really slowly. Okay, E minor 7. Then we have another part of the verse. We go up, back. So from measure 33, where we've got those 2 E minor 7s, that's the second line down, second page near the end. We have those 2 E minor 7s. And then we go into the first repeat, just like we just did. We go up to that D9 chord. We're still in the first repeat look on measure 35, where we hit these 2 notes, the 3 and 5. And then we don't go back to the second repeat. Notice there's another repeat marker at measure 21. So we go back as far as there. It's the second D9. And we keep climbing again, and we keep playing through the next bit. So 9, 10, 12, back to that G chord. And then we come back to the G minor chord. Second page once more, 1, 3, 7, 8, 10. G shape at the 9 and 10. 7 and 9 again. And then we have that funny A7 at the fretboard. So we're repeating everything we've just done, and we keep that repeat going. We go into the next section, 2, 4, for yet another verse. Lots of verses, right, in this song. Mostly verses. Okay, this is measure 29. Keep it going. Now, when we get to measure 33 again, this time we're going to do the second repeat. So we do measure 33, those 2 E minor 7s. And then this time we jump to measure 36 for the outro because we're doing the second repeat. And remember, wherever you've got a first and second repeat, you always jump to the second repeat the second time. You don't repeat the first one again. So here we go to measure 36. And it's a progression we've done before, which ends on a D chord. Here, okay. Then we play those 2 open A notes on measure 37 before the final line. A normal G minor, C note, G minor up here in this E minor shape, 7th fret, and then we get that G shape for a D chord at the top. Isn't that really beautiful? So from those 2 open A's on the penultimate line, it will sound like this. Now you don't have to, but when I do this part of the outro, when I've hit those A7s and A9s and this D chord, I start to slow down this last phrase. It kind of creates a really nice drama and a nice kind of ending, which is really sweet. Then basically we're repeating the phrase. Now this was a guitar part in the original, and we're going to replicate it on the ukulele like so. Isn't that pretty? So the melody has already stopped here. That's the end of the melody. And then this is like a little repeat. Just to finish everything off. It's really, really beautiful. So what we've got here is some really beautiful, simple two-part harmony. Basically, we have the original melody going along the A string. And we pair that up with notes those notes are a third above. So by playing this note here, the second fret of the E string at the same time as the open A string, we have an F sharp and an A, and those are a third apart. F sharp, G, A. We call that a third. Then when we go up, we have this shape next, 3 and 1. That's a G and a B flat. Again, a third apart, G, A, B flat. So it's basically classic two-part harmony, which is really sweet. And it's really simple to do. It just comes from playing out of shapes, really. These are often called double stops. What we're going to do is we're going to drag the thumb down over the bottom two strings physically whilst we put our finger on the second fret of the E string. Then we go into this shape, 1 and 3 here. I like to use my first and third fingers. We take that up to 5 and 3. And then we go to an A shape, like an A major chord, at 6 and 5. Take it up to 8 and 7. And then finally we have that G shape up here for a final D chord. Okay, so we get this lovely. A really beautiful way to end the song. And there we have it, a really, really sweet version of If I Fell. And it just goes to show Paul McCartney didn't get all the best melodies. John Lennon wrote a few as well. Isn't that a gorgeous song? And of course, bear in mind, that's one of the hardest pieces we've had to play so far in terms of finger positions, certainly with those chords going up the fretboard. So really take your time, slow things down, practice at an incredibly slow tempo, and then gradually speed it up. It's better to get things right going crazy, crazy slow than it is playing at tempo and getting it wrong, because that way you're going to build up anxiety and bad habits. So slow everything down, take your time, and really study the repeats as well. Really think about where you're going to go back. It's hard to do in real time unless you've really taken your time to study it and work out where you're going back to each time. You could even write little direction markers on your sheet music. I sometimes do that to help. Well, I really, really hope you enjoyed that, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next Beatles on Ukulele lesson very, very soon. Take care, everyone, and stay fab. Bye.
If I fell in love with you.